Hey guys, tonight we row out past the breakers, where the world thins into wind, salt, and nothingness. You're bundled in a heavy coat that somehow makes you colder, your boots slick with sea spray. The small skiff beneath you groans with each wave, and the mainland has already vanished behind a curtain of morning fog. Ahead, the lighthouse rises like a giant's candle from a rocky spit of land, just a stub of ground wrapped in kelp and barnacles, trying to be important in the middle of the sea. You're not here for the views. You're here to live. There are no crowds, no roads, no corner stores. Just a rotating beam of light, a journal to write in, and a wind that sounds like it's always mid-sigh. And you probably won't survive this if you forget to refill the oil tank. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you all listen in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at your post on a Monday morning in 1927. The sea is strangely calm, which every experienced mariner will tell you is a bad sign. The station's tender, a creaking supply boat captained by a man who looks like he was carved from driftwood, drops you off with a small trunk, 3 crates of supplies, and a final wave that says, "Good luck, sucker." You heave your belongings across the jagged shoreline toward the lighthouse. It's taller than you imagined. Weathered, elegant, in a lonely sort of way. There's a single narrow path that spirals up from the rocky edge to the front door. You take it slowly. Every step is a reminder that your legs haven't earned their sea stretch yet. The door creaks open with the solemnity of a church pew. Inside, it smells like salt, smoke, and old kerosene. The last keeper has left things tidy, his boots still by the door, his soap dish still crusted with residue, and his goodbye note pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. It reads, "Keep the wick trimmed, the logs honest, and don't feed the gulls. They're already entitled enough. Welcome to your new home." It takes half a day to explore the lighthouse. There's the small kitchen with its iron stove, a single cot with a mattress that feels like it's stuffed with seaweed, and a staircase that spirals endlessly upward like some minimalist punishment. At the top, the lantern room, the heart of the whole operation. Here, the great Fresnel lens looms like an alien artifact, rows upon rows of concentric glass rings, all stacked with surgical precision to bend and throw light miles into the sea. You step around it carefully, the way you might approach a sleeping bear. It magnifies your every movement, sending jittery echoes of yourself spinning into the night. Historians still argue whether the Fresnel lens is the greatest nautical invention of the 19th century or just the prettiest excuse for isolation therapy. You settle into your first evening routine. There's oil to be checked, lamps to be polished, and the steady process of acclimating, which is really just learning how to live without other people. Your dinner is reheated stew from a tin marked 1925 or earlier. You ignore the slight bulge in the can. No botulism yet, probably. As the sun sets, the beam from the lens ignites. slowly, majestically. It blinks across the waves like a weary sentinel, saying, "Yes, yes, I'm still here." You sit on the stone steps with your mug of hot water, no tea left from the last guy, and watch the sea try to forget the land. There's a calm here that feels designed. Not cozy, but purposeful. You begin to realize why some keepers stayed for decades. You also start to see why others, very occasionally, walked straight into the waves without looking back. One mainstream fact they taught you at the brief keeper training in Portland. By the 1920s, most U.S. lighthouses are managed by the Lighthouse Service, part of the Department of Commerce. You're technically a federal employee, which sounds impressive until you realize your job duties include remove bird corpses from windowsills and don't die. Still, the paycheck arrives every 2 weeks. Eventually. You note the time in the official logbook, 6:04 p.m., wind from the southeast, visibility moderate, lens rotation steady. Then, at the bottom of the page, you add your first little note to yourself. Day 1. Saw a seal or a sea witch, not ruling anything out. By midnight, the silence has a gravity of its own, the kind of silence that wraps around your ears like cotton. You try sleeping, but the cot groans, and the waves slap the rock in slow, lopsided rhythm, like the ocean is tapping its fingers. You drift in and out. You dream of foghorns and gulls with human eyes. Welcome to lighthouse life. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not easy. But something about it, something you can't quite name, starts to settle in your chest like ballast. You're not just keeping a light anymore. You're becoming part of it. Morning arrives not with a rooster, but with a thick wall of fog so dense it feels like you've woken up inside an old wool sock. The damp air clings to your eyelashes, to the walls, to your lungs. Everything is wet. Even the dryness is wet. You peel yourself out of the cot, bones stiff and limbs confused. Sleep here isn't exactly restful. It's more like extended blinking. Your dreams have been foggy too, stitched together from lapping waves, distant bells, and something that might have been a choir of owls, or just the wind pushing through the cracks in the glass. Down in the kitchen, you light the coal stove with fingers that move like twigs. It takes coaxing. A few muttered curses. Maybe some light begging. Eventually, the little iron belly glows warm, and your breath no longer clouds in front of you. You sit beside it with your tin mug of hot, well, hottish, coffee. The grounds are floating naturally. There's a spoon somewhere in the kitchen, probably, but it's too early to look. The morning log must be filled out. This is non-negotiable. The Lighthouse Service requires it. It's the sacred record of winds, visibility, wave height, and any odd occurrences. You squint out through the thick glass to see nothing. A blank, colorless void. Visibility, 0. Wind, unknown but definitely pushy. Mood, ghost adjacent. You note it all down, handwriting already going sideways. Historians still argue whether lighthouse logs were ever seriously reviewed by the folks in Washington, or if they just sat in a cabinet collecting mold, alongside forgotten tax receipts and some old admiral's sandwich. Outside, the foghorn bleats, long, low, and mournful. It's controlled by a little clockwork mechanism down in the basement that you'll eventually learn to wind and fix with a screwdriver and a prayer. But for now, it does its job, sending out warnings into the wet nothingness. Not for your benefit, of course. It's for ships that may or may not be approaching, hoping to avoid turning themselves into expensive splinters on the rocks. You open the narrow door and step outside. Your boots sink a little into the soaked moss lining the path. Somewhere above, the light keeps turning, utterly indifferent to your fragile human schedule. You walk the perimeter of the island, a generous term for the chunk of rock you're now responsible for. It takes about 6 minutes, or 12 if you pretend to be thorough. There's a rusted bench half buried in lichen, and a crumbling wooden shed that might have once held tools, but now mainly holds wind and nesting gulls. They watch you, always watching. You give them a polite nod. Inside again, you notice the sound of dripping. Not a leak, not yet, just the building exhaling. The whole tower seems to breathe with the fog. The walls sweat, the windows weep. Breakfast is exactly what you expect. Hardtack, tinned fruit, and some eggs you're not entirely sure are from this decade. You fry them anyway. They make a noise like resignation. Still, with enough salt, and by enough we mean a small mountain, they're edible. You sit on the cold wooden stool by the narrow window, chewing and staring. You think about the keeper who came before you. Did he sit right here? Did he stare into the same fog and wonder if it was worth it? You find his initials carved into the underside of the table. Neat, precise. Just L.H., 1925. You wonder where L.H. is now, probably inland somewhere, swearing off anything with salt or wind involved. Around mid-morning, you climb the stairs. Again. There are 137 of them, and yes, you counted. The climb is part of your daily penance. You carry a cloth and a tin of polish, because the glass of the lens requires constant attention. Not just for appearance. Dust or salt can scatter the light, make it weaker. That beam must shine as far and strong as possible. It's a matter of life and death for sailors who'll never know your name. You reach the top, breathing like an accordion. The lens looks like a giant, dignified jellyfish, every curve of it engineered with ridiculous precision. Some say Augustin Fresnel's design saved more lives than penicillin. Others say it's just very pretty glass. Both might be true. You start wiping it down, inch by inch. The cloth squeaks. Your reflection bends and warps across the glass panes like a funhouse mirror. There's something humbling about cleaning a 9,000-pound lens in complete solitude. It's like polishing a cathedral for an audience of barnacles. A fringe detail you discovered yesterday in the worn keeper's manual. If the fog lasts longer than 48 hours, you're technically allowed a half-day off from non-essential duties. This is perhaps the only documented perk of maritime fog in federal employment history. Still, you keep busy. There's soot to clean from the brass fittings, knobs to tighten, little tools to sharpen. The light must never fail. That's the unspoken rule. You climb back down. The staircase now creaks in ways you're starting to catalog. That groan on step 17? Harmless. The sharp pop on 46? Concerning, but manageable. You're starting to learn the building the way a farmer knows which fence post the crows favor. You eat lunch at noon. Another can of beans, this time warmed directly on the stove. They bubble enthusiastically, as if pretending they weren't sealed 20 years ago. You talk to the stove for company. It does not respond. And that's your first full foggy morning. Not bad, really. Damp, quiet, slightly ominous, but in a slow, polite way, like the kind of haunted house that serves tea. As the day ticks on, you begin to understand that the stillness is not empty, it's layered, like the sea, like the lens. There's rhythm here, and in the rhythm, something close to peace. The climb begins again. You've only been here a short while, but already the stairwell has become a strange kind of ritual. You know where your boot will slip just slightly on the iron step with the rusted bolt. You know when to duck your head as you pass the crooked support beam someone forgot to sand properly in 1906. Up you go, coiling through the tower like a slow-motion spring. The lantern room waits at the top, not impatient, just perpetually expectant. The air grows thinner up here, or maybe that's just your lungs staging a small rebellion. You finally reach the top, the trapdoor creaks open, and you're met with a familiar panorama of fog. Again. But there's a strange dignity in it now, like being repeatedly stood up by a very graceful ghost. Today, your job is simple. Polish the lens and check the mechanism. But the lens, it's more than just a job. It's a choreographed dance. You unwrap your cleaning cloth, set your polish down on the little ledge, and begin the gentle process of wiping each section with reverent care. The Fresnel lens is, objectively, overkill. It's a towering, glittering, multi-tiered structure made of hundreds of precisely cut glass prisms. It bends light in ways that would make a physicist cry and a sailor sleep easier. Each segment is like a frozen ripple, catching and bending the smallest beam into something visible for 20 miles. Quirky tidbit? Sure. Some early keepers used to wear blackout hoods while polishing the lens during daylight hours to avoid being momentarily blinded by the sunlight refracting off the prisms. You consider this as you squint, attempting not to be seared like an ant under a magnifying glass. You rotate the lens slightly, gingerly, and check for dust, smudges, bird droppings. Yes, they somehow get in. And the occasional spider attempting to homestead inside a national navigational aid. You gently shoo one now, watching it abseil down on a silk thread like an overly dramatic trapeze artist. The lens rotation mechanism is a work of mechanical poetry, a slow, dignified dance powered by a series of counterweights and gears, ticking away beneath the floor like a grandfather clock that only cares about ships. You peer into the housing. Everything looks smooth, oiled, steady. You give the winch handle an obligatory crank and listen as the weight slowly winds up again, ready to drop with perfect consistency for another half day. There's something deeply reassuring about the clink of chain and gear teeth locking into place. Historians still argue whether keepers were trained more as technicians or as monks, because truthfully, your work up here feels like a blend of both. You serve something you don't fully understand, maintaining a rhythm that exists not for you, but for others who will never know your name, your face, or your caffeine struggles. From this high up, on the rare days when the fog lifts, the view is devastating. You'd see a scatter of rocky islands dotting the sea like forgotten thoughts. fishing trawlers trailing lazy wakes, seabirds circling with the kind of focus that suggests they've memorized your lunch schedule. But today, of course, you see none of that. Just the vast, pearly blur of ocean air and your own reflection stretched thin across the glass. You take a moment, forehead resting gently on the window frame, and exhale. The kind of breath that empties not just your lungs, but your to-do list, your thoughts, and any lingering hope that someone brought you fresh coffee. You spot a journal tucked beside the little maintenance shelf. It's old, leather-bound, edges curled with time. Flipping through, you find sketches of the lens, diagrams, obscure measurements, and a note written in spidery script. If you ever drop the cleaning rag into the lens housing, retrieve it immediately. Do not assume the building will forgive you. You nod solemnly. That feels right. Lunchtime rolls past without ceremony. A cold biscuit, some cheese that's now more philosophy than food, and a pear that's doing its best to become a liquid. You eat anyway, perched beside the huge central column of the lens, the light slowly revolving behind you like a silent giant stretching its arms. After lunch, you notice one of the panes has a hairline crack. Nothing serious. Not yet. But it's there. You note it in the log. Lens segment 11C, minor fracture, stable. Then you underline it, just in case someone ever reads it and decides to care. You climb down slowly, hand sliding along the railing, steps creaking their familiar tune. Back on the ground floor, you drink more hot water. Calling it tea feels insulting to both you and tea, and sketch a rough map of the island from memory. It's a circle with 3 X's, one for the bench, one for the shed, and one for the rock that looks like a sea lion but definitely isn't. You check the oil stores. Still full. But you make a note to refill the lamp early this evening. Always early. Because you remember the story. Every lighthouse has one. The keeper who waited too long, who misjudged the sunset, who spilled the oil or knocked the wick askew, and whose light didn't shine in time. And somewhere, someone paid the price. A wreck, a loss, a name carved into driftwood. You don't plan to be that story. Before dinner, you make one more climb, this time to sit in the lantern room as the light turns on. You sit cross-legged on the narrow steel platform, arms wrapped around your knees, watching the beam rotate in slow ceremonial arcs. It passes over the sea, then the fog, then the empty void where stars used to be. This is the most powerful thing you've ever been near, not because it's bright, but because it matters. It keeps people alive. It creates meaning in the middle of nowhere. And for now, that's your job. You smile softly. Just don't drop the rag. You start your evening with a simple task, keeping the light alive. Not metaphorically, literally. That warm, slowly turning beacon at the top of your lighthouse doesn't glow on goodwill alone. It runs on paraffin oil, heavy, pungent, and stubborn. The kind of fuel that clings to your clothes and announces your presence before you enter any room, not that anyone's around to notice. Your first stop is the storage room, a low-ceilinged, claustrophobic chamber stacked with dented metal drums, each sloshing with the amber-gold lifeblood of the lighthouse. You heft one of the smaller containers into your arms, knees bending in that awkward way that says, "This is fine. Definitely not a hernia. Back up the stairs you go, 137 steps, though today they feel like double. Your arms ache. Your back issues a quiet protest. You consider bribing yourself with a second biscuit if you survive the climb. At the top, you pour the oil slowly into the reservoir. The smell hits you first, sharp, chemical, and vaguely nostalgic, like your grandfather's shed if your grandfather was in the business of maintaining nautical fire hazards. The wick sits like a patient little snake in the center of the burner, waiting for its evening meal. You trim it carefully. Too short, and it'll gutter. Too long, and it'll smoke. You strike a match and introduce it to the wick. There's a moment of hesitation, like the lamp is considering whether to forgive you. Then, whoosh. A soft, steady flame dances to life. A whisper of heat rolls off the burner, and you feel it in your fingers. Warmth, yes, but also duty. You adjust the focus, watching the beam sharpen, then test the rotation again. Still moving, still shining. You record it all in the logbook. 6:07 p.m. Flame lit. Burner steady. Rotation continuous. Lens clean. Feeling cautiously optimistic. The flame is beautiful in its simplicity. It eats oil. It makes light. It asks very little in return except that you feed it, clean around it, and never, ever forget it. Historians still argue whether the greatest challenge of lighthouse keeping was the solitude or the constant maintenance. The answer, of course, is yes. You linger up top for a while longer, watching the sky drain itself of color. The fog is lifting slightly tonight, and the first stars begin to blink awake, distant and faint, as if they're checking to make sure the lighthouse is doing its job before fully committing. Downstairs, your reward awaits. Stew from a tin and hardtack that would make a brick jealous. You gnaw on it thoughtfully, staring out the small window, watching the beam sweep across the sea every 12 seconds. A metronome for survival. You try the radio, more out of ritual than hope. The old Marconi box crackles and sighs. On a good night, you might pick up a weather bulletin or a faraway signal from another station. Tonight, it gives you nothing but soft static, like the sea whispering in Morse code. After dinner, you do your nightly inspection. You carry your lamp, casting shifting shadows across the tight corridors and low-beamed rooms. Everything smells of oil and salt and time. The stone walls seem to hold echoes, though you never quite catch them in the act. In the basement, you check the clockwork mechanism again, the one that turns the lens slowly, majestically, like a carousel for ghosts. You wind it up, feeling the resistance in the crank, the weight slowly rising into place. If it slips, the light will stop turning. And if the light stops turning, well, let's not invite that sort of drama. The basement also contains what you call the room of useful doom. Spare parts, tools, extra wicks, ropes, buckets, and a mysterious box labeled "Do Not Open," seriously, in smeared pencil. You will, inevitably, open it someday. Just not tonight. Before bed, you clean your hands with a rag that hasn't been cleaned since President Taft. You splash cold water from the basin across your face. The mirror above it is cracked, just enough to show you your reflection in duplicate. 2 lighthouse keepers, one on each side of the looking glass. You nod to both. You record your final note in the log. 10:14 p.m. Light steady. Fuel at 3:04. Fog retreating. Radio useless. Reflection looking smug. You crawl into your cot. The mattress squeaks in protest. The wool blanket smells like warm dust, and your pillow is a folded towel that's seen too many necks. But still, somehow, this feels like yours now. Just before you drift off, you think about the flame upstairs, still burning, still watching, still alive. You once read that lighthouses don't go out all at once. They sputter, fade, flicker, and sometimes it takes days for anyone to notice. But not yours, not tonight. The room darkens, the sea hums, the light spins, and in its glow, you sleep. The morning arrives with a wet thud, not the metaphorical kind, the actual, literal kind. Something heavy and slimy has landed on the roof again. You stare at the ceiling, listening. 1 beat, 2. A gull, perhaps, or a large fish with ambitions. Either way, it's time to get up. You shuffle to the kitchen, boots squelching slightly from yesterday's damp. Breakfast is a solemn ritual now. You toast hardtack over the stove's flame like it's a gourmet delicacy, then scrape the last of the tinned marmalade from a jar so old it might qualify as an antique. There's a chunk of something in it that could be orange peel or fossil. Either way, it crunches. Your cutlery has seen better days. You hold up a rusted fork and squint. Was that rust there yesterday? Probably. You scrape it with the knife, producing a high-pitched sound that makes you question your life choices. In the silence that follows, a mouse, or possibly a ghost, rustles faintly under the floorboards. You eat your breakfast like someone politely enduring a punishment. 1 bite, 2 chews, a slow, skeptical swallow. And then, just when you think you've gotten used to it, you discover the canned peaches. They were buried deep in the cupboard, behind a box of ancient barley and something labeled baking lard. The peaches are in a can the size of a baby's head, marked Property of the U.S. Lighthouse Service, not for resale. That label alone gives them a kind of dusty gravitas. You open the tin slowly, expecting a puff of haunted air. Instead, nectar. Golden syrup and slices of sun-colored fruit that somehow still hold their shape. You eat one. It is, unquestionably, the best thing you've tasted in weeks. Possibly ever. You eat another. You try not to cry. Mainstream fact. By the 1920s, many lighthouses were supplied monthly by tenders, small ships bringing fuel, food, and sometimes a very bored bureaucrat. The keepers could request goods in advance, though the list of available items was limited. Canned peaches, it turns out, were a common indulgence. Someone, somewhere in Washington, had a soft spot for fruit. Your appreciation is interrupted by the realization that the spoon you're using is bending. The metal is thin and surrendering under the weight of syrup. You swap it for a ladle and eat the rest standing up like a man who's seen some things. Cleanup involves a small bucket of brackish water and a cloth that's trying very hard not to be a rag. You scrub your tin dish, wipe down the table, and make a mental note to start rationing the peaches. You won't, of course. They'll be gone in 3 days, tops. After breakfast, it's time for maintenance. The brass fittings on the lantern housing need polishing. The floorboards need sweeping. The rain gutters need clearing, which involves leaning dangerously over the rail and swearing at some seagulls who've taken an interest in your ladder. One of them has a limp and a single baleful eye. You name him Commodore Regret. You check the kerosene stores again. Still solid. You top off the lamp anyway. Just a splash, a little reassurance. The lens itself still gleams from yesterday's polish, and you allow yourself a rare moment of smugness, the kind that only comes from knowing you've successfully removed every single speck of soot with a toothbrush. You descend to the small sitting room, where there is precisely one chair, one side table, and one book. The Federal Lightkeeper's Handbook. You read a section aloud just to hear a voice. The keeper shall refrain from tampering with or attempting to repair the lens mechanism unless explicitly instructed to do so by an authorized official. You look at the lens, then at the book, then back at the lens. You close the book and place it face down like it said something rude. As the day stretches out, you begin to feel the weight of time. There are no meetings, no errands, no chores you haven't already finished twice. So, you invent one. Rust removal. Armed with vinegar, steel wool, and questionable optimism, you attack the hinges of the tool shed. They squeal in protest, but slowly give way, revealing a trove of long-forgotten supplies: rope, pulleys, an unopened bottle of malt vinegar, no idea why, and a box of nails so old they might be pre-Civil War. You organize it all with obsessive care, lining up each tool by size and making a list. The act of cataloging gives your mind something to chew on, and soon an hour, or 3, has passed. By late afternoon, the wind picks up. The sea's color shifts from sleepy gray to something a little darker, more serious. You feel it in your bones before you even look at the barometer. A storm's coming. Not a big one. Not yet. Just a little tap on the shoulder from the ocean, reminding you who's in charge. Dinner is more stew, this time with a few boiled potatoes tossed in for variety. You pretend it helps. As the rain begins, you climb the tower again, just to be sure. The beam turns smoothly. The light is steady. You lean your forehead against the cool glass and watch the storm begin to swallow the horizon. Quirky tidbit. Some lighthouse keepers believed that eating the same food every day would keep them anchored, mentally and spiritually. You're not sure if that's wisdom or a symptom. You sleep with the sound of wind pressing against the walls. A long, slow sigh of pressure that rocks the tower just enough to remind you you're not alone out here. Not really, because the sea always notices. And sometimes it answers. You wake to a sound you've come to crave more than conversation. The faint, unmistakable thrum of an engine out at sea. You roll out of bed, boots thudding to the floor, and race to the narrow window. Yes, there it is. A squat little tender boat slicing through the waves like it's late to its own birthday. The supply boat has arrived. You throw on your coat, still damp from yesterday's drizzle, and take the winding steps down to the shoreline. The sea is behaving itself today. Just enough whitecaps to feel alive, but not enough to toss the little boat around like a toy. The crew aboard wave as they approach, and you wave back with both hands, suddenly aware that your voice might be creakier than your stairs if you try to shout. This is your link to the mainland, your quarterly dose of humanity. The boat bumps gently against the rocks, and two men jump ashore with a practiced rhythm. One is young and impossibly cheerful. The other looks like he's been personally insulted by the sea for the last 40 years. They greet you with the kind of casualness that implies you might be the first human they've seen since lunch. Got your beans, your oil, and, lucky you, some fresh socks, the younger one says, hoisting a crate onto the stones. You could weep. The exchange is fast, efficient. The old man signs a weather-beaten manifest with a pencil stub. You haul the crates up the slope like a pack mule with federal benefits. Cans of food, drums of paraffin, a sack of mail, and, this part is crucial, a small box labeled personal items. That's where your one luxury order per quarter goes. You set the box aside for later. Anticipation is everything. Historians still argue whether the supply schedules for remote lighthouses were designed for efficiency or simply to keep the keepers humble. Sometimes boats were delayed for weeks. Once, in 1911, a keeper in Maine went 5 months without resupply and reportedly subsisted on seagull eggs and regret. Inside now, unpacking like it's Christmas for one. A new pair of socks, actual wool, not whatever those last ones had disintegrated into. A tin of proper tea leaves, a box of fresh pencils, a replacement wick set. And, from your personal order, a slim novel, dog-eared even in its shrink wrap, A Journey to the Center of the Earth. You laugh out loud. There's no one to hear it, which makes it even better. With the boat gone and the sea calm again, you take your tea and sit on the bench outside. It still smells vaguely like kelp and mildew, but the cushion you fashioned out of burlap and wool stuffing does its best to help. You watch the horizon as the sun peeks through torn clouds. A gull lands a few feet away and eyes your tea with what feels like judgment. This is when it happens. Out past the edge of the fog, you catch something, a shape, a motion. Not the supply boat, not a fishing vessel. It's too low, too still. A shadow on the water that doesn't move with the waves. You squint. It's gone. You blink. Nothing. Quirky tidbit. Stories abound of lighthouse keepers seeing ghost ships during long stays. Phantom schooners drifting silently past. Entire crews waving from decks that haven't existed in a century. Historians still debate whether these are mirages, stress-induced hallucinations, or just excellent sea-based marketing. You head inside, a little unnerved, but also a little thrilled. You write it down in the log, as required. 2:43 p.m. Received supply delivery, all accounted for. Brief fog clearing, possible sighting of uncharted vessel. Disappeared. Maybe don't mention this to HQ. The rest of the afternoon you spend organizing. New tins go in the back. Old ones to the front. You stack everything with mild obsession. Because in a lighthouse, order is sanity. Every label facing forward. Every item in its place. You even oil the hinges on the pantry door, which squeals less like a banshee now and more like an annoyed mouse. As night falls, you light the lantern again. The flame flares, catches, and grows into its usual calm, glowing heartbeat. The lens turns. The sea listens. You sit upstairs for a while with your new book, trying to read by the flickering glow of the flame. But it's hard to concentrate when you keep glancing out to sea, wondering if you'll spot it again. That ship, or whatever it was. Dinner is better tonight. You cook rice, real rice, and mix it with some canned salmon. For dessert, you allow yourself one of the remaining peach slices. You chew slowly, reverently. The wind picks up again, gentle at first, then insistent. The shutters rattle once, twice. You don't see the ship again, but you do find, tucked into the corner of your mail bundle, a handwritten note. It's from another keeper, a stranger, stationed at a lighthouse miles down the coast. The note reads, "Got your last letter. Fog's been strange here too. Saw lights offshore last week. No ship listed. Stay sharp." You turn the note over. That's all. No return address, no name. Just the ocean doing what it does best, carrying half-finished stories from one pair of eyes to another. That night, you dream of hulls beneath the water, of bells chiming from nowhere, and of a crew that waves without faces. You wake once to check the lamp. Still burning. Still alive. There comes a moment in every lighthouse keeper's week when your brain, starved for stimulation, begins to do strange and wondrous things. You start your day like always. Tea, log entry, a quick look at the barometer that seems permanently disappointed in you. But by mid-morning, after the usual maintenance, oil check, and seagull-related diplomacy, you find yourself standing in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do next. There are no leaks to patch. The lens is spotless. The flame is steady. The supply shelves look like a military rationing dream. You have nothing but time, and time, as it turns out, is a bit of a troublemaker. So you begin inventing tasks. Your first idea is the ceremonial driftwood whittling. You grab a salt-smoothed piece of wood from the shore, some long-forgotten plank that may or may not have come from a shipwreck, and you carve it into something that vaguely resembles a duck. Or maybe it's a seal. Either way, it now lives on the windowsill and is officially named Captain Beekson. Next, you decide that your shoes deserve a good polish, not because anyone will see them, but because you will see them, and frankly, they've been looking judgmental lately. You put on your formal jacket, the one meant for inspections, and walk up and down the stairs just to feel important. It doesn't make the stairs any easier, but it does make you feel a little like royalty in exile. You greet your own reflection in the lantern room with a dignified nod. "Your Excellency," you whisper to yourself. The reflection nods back. Then there's the hobby you never expected to pick up, writing poetry. You find scraps of paper, a stubby pencil, and start composing odes to the fog, limericks about beans, and a surprisingly moving haiku about the broken window latch in the sitting room. Cold wind sneaks inside, through the crack near my left knee, drafty but loyal. You post it in the pantry. It gets mixed reviews from the flour. Historians still argue whether isolation in lighthouse service was a mental health hazard or an oddly therapeutic vacation from the chaos of civilization. Many keepers went stir-crazy. Some found peace. A rare few apparently learned to yodel. You, at least, are discovering your inner dramatist. Midday, you hear a sharp tap on the window. You look up, half hoping for a face you recognize. Instead, it's just a crab, a rather large one, somehow on the second-story windowsill. You salute him. He does not return the gesture. To shake off the creeping stillness, you decide to reorganize the entire log archive. This is more exciting than it sounds. The records go back decades, and flipping through them is like reading the diary of the sea itself. You find an entry from 1903. 6:10 p.m., light operational, storm forming, cooked biscuits, saw a man on the rocks, vanished. And another from 1914. Fog dense, heard violin music from the direction of the sea, no explanation found. You suddenly feel connected, like a thread between solitary souls. All of you just out here, squinting at the ocean, trying to decide if you're hallucinating or just really bored. Your tea goes cold as you read. Later, you sketch a map of the island again, this time adding small labels. Gull Battleground, Crab Embassy, Regret Rock. You add a small doodle of Captain Beekson looking slightly heroic. Then it's time for singing hour. This is a private affair. You close the shutters, pull your coat tight, and hum old sea shanties under your breath while dusting shelves. You forget most of the words, so you improvise. Yo-ho, the tea is gone, and I am 93. It gets a bit theatrical. The mop gets a solo. Quirky tidbit. Some 1920s lighthouse keepers were known to construct elaborate imaginary social circles. They assigned names and ranks to tools, named the seagulls, and once, according to a possibly embellished account, held a full wedding ceremony between a lantern polish rag and a broom. You're not quite there yet, but the mop's looking suspiciously dapper today. By late afternoon, a fog rolls in again, soft and apologetic. You take your mug and sit by the window, watching the world vanish. The beam from the lantern cuts through it like a sleepy eye, blinking slowly every 12 seconds. You time your breathing to it. 12 seconds inhale. 12 seconds exhale. You feel less like a person and more like a metronome with boots. Dinner is a wild culinary experiment. Beans, dried apple slices, and a sprinkle of black pepper. You declare it semi-soup. It's edible. Barely. The radio gives you a weather report that's 2 days old and half faded. It predicts fog likely, which is about as useful as a forecast saying sky remains above. You record everything in the log. 7:09 p.m. Flame strong. Fog thick. Crab diplomacy ongoing. Whittled Captain Beekson. Morale unusually high. You laugh at your own handwriting. You're not sure if this is madness or just really good coping skills. Either way, you're okay. Night falls. You read a few more pages from your novel, eyes heavy. There's a line about underground cities and echoing caverns that makes you pause. You think about the lighthouse, its rooms, its turns, its quiet. Isn't this just an above-ground cavern? And aren't you just a very punctual mole? You check the light one last time. Still burning, still turning, still yours. And as you slip into sleep, you smile. Because today, the sea didn't take your sanity. It just asked you to dance with it a little. There's a moment, brief, strange, when you wake up and forget where you are. Not in a panicked, amnesiac way, more like a flicker of confusion. You expect city sounds. a neighbor's footsteps, the bark of a dog. But instead, you're greeted by the low hum of the sea pressing against the stone walls, the muffled creak of the tower settling into its foundations like an old man into a familiar chair. Then you remember. Oh, right. The lighthouse. Your lighthouse. You sit up slowly, blanket twisted around your legs, hair doing its best impression of a wind-blasted thicket. Outside, the fog has parted just enough to reveal a shy patch of sky, pale, tentative blue. It's been days since you've seen anything that could be described as color. It's unnerving, frankly. You squint at it like it might bite. After a rinse with icy water and the ceremonial stomping into your boots, you head to the kitchen. You prepare what has now become your signature dish. Tea-like beverage, served with judgmental biscuit. The biscuit crumbles reluctantly. The tea is slightly better today, thanks to the new leaves from the supply drop. You swirl it in the mug and almost believe it tastes like something someone would drink on purpose. You take breakfast outside. The bench is damp, as always, but the sunlight, is worth the damp pants. You sit, steam rising from your mug, eyes on the open water. A gull screeches overhead, possibly telling you off for using its favorite perch. The sea is calmer than it has any right to be. Glassy. Still. You can see ripples from small fish darting beneath the surface. For the first time in weeks, you spot a sailboat on the horizon. Just a dot, moving lazily across the blue like a thought drifting through someone else's dream. You raise your mug to it. Whoever they are, wherever they're going, you wish them good weather. Back inside, you decide it's a good day to tackle the drawer. Every lighthouse has one. That drawer. The one packed with half-dead batteries, broken compass needles, keys that fit no known lock, buttons from long-dead coats, and at least one mysterious object that looks like a brass potato but might be an old electrical part. You open it slowly, as if it might bite. You sort through the contents like an archaeologist at a dig site. One by one, you lay them out. There's a cracked magnifying glass, a whistle, still works. 3 different notes in the margins of an old lighthouse manual. Don't trust the crank. And a packet of toothpicks sealed in wax paper. You marvel. You sort. You assign stories. That's what time does out here. It turns objects into characters. Mid-morning, you take inventory of the emergency rations. Not because you're running low, but because it makes you feel useful. The tins are lined up in careful rows. You wipe the tops of each one, checking for rust. One of them is labeled beef loaf. You frown at it. It frowns back. You leave it alone. Mainstream fact. In the 1920s, lighthouses were stocked with a truly impressive or horrifying array of canned meats. Everything from corned tongue to minced ham and gelatin. No one knows if this was for nutrition, storage longevity, or just to make keepers appreciate silence more. You spend the next hour in the lantern room. The light is turning, as always. Its rhythm now lives inside your bones. You sit beside it and close your eyes, listening to the quiet clink of the mechanism, the wind pressing gently at the glass. You try to imagine what a sailor sees. Just a point of brightness in the dark, something steady, something alive. Then you notice something new. A thin, feathered crack along one of the panes, not from storm or wear, but from age. The glass is changing under your care, quietly. It's a reminder that nothing stays pristine. Everything you touch is slowly aging alongside you. You trace the crack with one finger, gently, and make a note to mark it in the log. Quirky tidbit. One 1920s keeper became so obsessed with keeping the glass spotless that he was reportedly let go for excessive polishing. Not because it was dangerous, but because he had, quote, ceased doing any other tasks, including eating. You're not quite there, but your rag is in your pocket, just in case. Lunchtime brings a creative burst. You toast bread on the end of a screwdriver held over the stove, melt some cheese, probably cheese, and add a dash of pepper. You christen it Seafaring Melt. You eat it triumphantly, standing over the sink like a champion. The afternoon stretches long and slow. You clean the radio, though it hasn't worked properly in weeks. Still, there's a comfort in the dials, in the ritual. Sometimes it crackles. Sometimes it wheezes. Occasionally, it coughs up a sliver of music, a trumpet from somewhere far away, a warbling vocal that sounds like it's being sung through fog. You write a letter you'll probably never send. Just a note to no one in particular. Weather's fine. The gulls are at peace. I'm not lonely exactly, just slow. The kind of slow that settles in your bones like sea salt. I think I might name the mop soon. You fold it, put it in a jar, and tuck it under a floorboard, just in case someone else comes after you, just in case they wonder what it was like. Dinner is uneventful. Boiled potatoes and something from a tin labeled vegetable medley, which turns out to be mostly corn and defiance. You finish your novel. The last page hits you with that quiet ache only good books know how to deliver. You close it slowly, hand resting on the cover. The light still turns. You sit beside it until late. And when you sleep, you dream not of storms or ghost ships, but of peeling oranges on a summer porch, of bicycles, of the feeling of stepping into a bakery where someone already knows your name. The sea gives you silence, but your mind fills it with everything else. You're jolted awake at 3:17 a.m. by a sound you haven't heard in weeks. A bell. Not yours. Not the lantern mechanism, not the stove groaning, not the wind breathing through the shutters. This is different. Metallic, distant, and strangely rhythmic. You sit up too fast, knocking your mug off the bedside table. It lands with a soft thud and rolls to a stop, like even it is holding its breath. You grab your coat, still half asleep, and stumble up the stairs with a lamp in hand. The air feels off. Heavy, somehow. The kind of air that suggests something is happening, but hasn't fully decided whether it's polite to tell you. You reach the top. The lantern is fine, still turning. The flame dances with its usual sleepy grace. But then you hear it again. Clang. Clang. Pause. Clang. You swing open the narrow window in the lantern room. The wind hits you in the face like a cold, wet handshake. You lean out carefully, squinting into the dark. Nothing. But the bell rings again. Somewhere out at sea, far enough to be hidden in fog, close enough to feel personal. You can't see the source, but the rhythm is steady, purposeful, like it's moving. You feel it in your chest, that prickly, ancient part of your brain stirring, the one that evolved specifically to tell you, hey, maybe don't. Historians still argue whether these nighttime sounds came from drifting buoys, passing ships, or the fraying edge of sleep deprivation. Some called them fog bells. Others called them warnings. And a few, in forgotten lighthouse logs, simply wrote, "It rang. I listened." You do exactly that. You listen. And then, eventually, the sound fades. You climb back down, a little colder, a little more awake than you'd like. You make a cup of tea so strong it tastes like despair filtered through a muslin sock. You sit by the window, staring at the horizon that doesn't exist anymore, and write in the log, 3:32 a.m. Heard bell at sea. Unknown source. Faded. No visual confirmation. Lantern functioning. Mood. Vague dread. By the time dawn seeps in, soft and pale, you're still at the table, fingers tapping lightly on the mug. The gulls return, as they always do, squawking and squabbling as though nothing is remotely weird. One of them makes direct eye contact with you and drops a clam on the roof. You take that as a form of cosmic punctuation. Breakfast is toast, slightly burned, and a peach slice as consolation. You deserve it. You spend the morning double-checking everything. The lens, clean. The rotation, steady. The oil levels, perfect. You sweep every room, polish every hinge, refill the stove, clean the salt crust from the window panes, and even scrub the lantern room floor until it looks like a freshly licked spoon. You pause once to scold yourself. This level of activity smells suspiciously like avoidance. But then again, there's a lot to avoid when the sea rings bells in the dark and refuses to explain itself. The afternoon brings a small miracle. Sunlight. Honest, warm, golden sunlight that pours through the windows like honey and stretches itself across the stone floor. You open every shutter, every door, and just stand in it. The warmth soaks into your bones, into the grain of the wood, into the tea kettle. Even the usually suspicious mop seems to sigh in relief. You move your chair into the light and sit with a book you've already read twice. You don't open it. You just sit. Quirky tidbit. Some lighthouse keepers in the 1920s were known to measure their days not by clocks, but by the shape of the sunlight through their windows. One keeper wrote, "When the light hits the far wall, it is time for soup. When it fades off the stairs, it is time to sleep." You consider adopting that system. You consider writing a haiku about it. You do. Sunlight on stone wall. I forget what day this is. Don't really need it. At dusk, you sit in the lantern room again, watching the sun leave like it's quietly sneaking out of a bad party. You light the flame. You check the wick. You adjust the focus. Everything is perfect. Mechanical, meditative, safe. The beam begins its slow, faithful rotation. 12 seconds of light. 12 seconds of dark. You count them without realizing. The rhythm has become your heartbeat. After dinner, rice and beans and the last of your pepper, you find yourself drawn to the shoreline. You stand where the tender boat docks during deliveries. The tide is low, The stones are slick with seaweed. The fog is thinner tonight, just a gauze across the water. And then, there it is again. That sound. Not a bell this time. Something softer. A voice. No words. Just a note. A kind of humming. Not quite human, not quite natural. You freeze. Listen. The hairs on your neck do a little chorus kick. It fades again. You don't chase it. You don't even move. You simply nod. You're starting to learn the rules out here. Not everything is for understanding. Some things are just present. Like weather. Like time. Like the sea, singing softly to itself. You return inside. You write one final note in the log. 9:04 p.m. Strange sound from water. Possibly wind. Possibly not. No visuals. Keeping light steady. Sea continues its weird poetry. You smile, because honestly, that's the job. You begin the morning in a wildly irresponsible way. You oversleep. Not by much, just an hour. But it's enough to jolt you upright in your bunk, heart racing, certain that you've caused a nautical disaster simply by sleeping in. You rush up the tower steps barefoot, bad idea, and burst into the lantern room with a panic only a lighthouse keeper can truly understand. And there it is, still turning, still glowing, still entirely fine. You exhale the kind of breath that feels like it came from the marrow of your bones. Nothing exploded. No ships crashed. No angry telegram from HQ about your moment of sloth. Just you, slightly sweaty, mildly ashamed, and extremely aware that the only person judging you is, well, also you. You return to the kitchen, make tea with trembling hands, and give yourself a stern talking to over dry toast. Something about professionalism and you're not being hunted by pirates. Calm down. After that, it's time to tackle something you've been putting off all week, the journal backlog. You keep a separate journal from the official lighthouse log, your personal record, not the mechanical, flame-lit, oil-topped stuff. This one's for thoughts, dreams, moments, cracks in the paint that remind you of maps, the way the gulls walk like tiny, angry librarians, the smell of rain before it arrives. You flip through old pages. Some entries are nonsense, some are poetry. One is just the word peaches, written in all caps with 6 underlines. You fill today's page slowly. Dreamed of doorways. Too many. All of them led back here. One smelled like mint. The sea still whispers. I still answer. You pause. You stare out the window. And then, with a small, contented sigh, you underline it once. Mainstream fact. Some 1920s keepers were encouraged by the lighthouse service to keep private logs in addition to official records. It helped preserve morale and provided, unintentionally, a treasure trove of deeply weird literature. One entry reads simply, "The gull has opinions. I've stopped arguing." You spend the afternoon sorting through old storm gear. Slickers, ropes, rubber boots, a lantern that might be from the Civil War. You test the gear like it's inspection day, even though no one's coming. Still, you line it all up on the hooks, neatly spaced and waiting like a museum exhibit titled, "Things That Might Save Me." It starts to rain, not a storm. just that soft, persistent drizzle that feels like the sky forgot how to cry properly. You listen to it tap against the windows and drip from the eaves. You stand beneath the lantern and polish the brass out of habit. The light turns. Your reflection moves with it. Then you spot something odd. The crack in the lantern glass, the one you noticed days ago, has grown. Just slightly. Barely a hair's width. But you know it wasn't that long yesterday. You place your hand gently over it. The glass feels colder there, as if the air on the other side has changed. You frown. But there's nothing to do. You log it. You make a note to request a replacement pane on the next supply run, knowing it may take months. And still, you watch it for a while, just to be sure. Dinner is soup. Well, technically, hydrated lentil paste. But if you squint and eat it with a spoon, it counts. You sprinkle in dried herbs like a wizard adding pixie dust. It helps. Barely. You read for a while. You write a poem about soup. You lose a chess match to yourself and accuse the salt shaker of cheating. Normal things. Then comes the scream. Not a loud one. Not human. But it cuts across the wind with the kind of high, ragged pitch that makes your skin forget how to sit properly on your bones. You freeze mid-step. The spoon slips into the bowl with a muted splash. You listen. And you hear it again. But this time, it's lower, longer, almost mournful. You grab the binoculars, heart thudding against your ribs like a broom against floorboards. You sweep the dark sea back and forth, searching. Nothing. Just mist, and waves, and a tiny, barely there light far in the distance. Could be a buoy, could be a ship, could be a star that got confused. Quirky tidbit. Several keepers in isolated posts reported hearing animal sounds from the sea during foggy nights. Most were never explained. Some blamed seals. Others suspected whales. One keeper swore it was a foghorn that had learned how to feel sadness. You jot a quick entry in the log. 9:48 p.m. Heard sound from sea. Possibly animal. Possibly not. Single light observed briefly. Lantern glass crack expanding slightly. All systems operational. Vibe. Uncertain. You check the lamp again before bed. Still burning. Still doing its job. Still watching. But as you lie in bed, listening to the soft tick of the clock and the breath of the rain, you find yourself whispering aloud. I heard it too. Just in case the sea was wondering. You wake up to fog so thick, it feels like the lighthouse has been buried inside a ghost. It's the kind of whiteout that eats light for breakfast. You can't see the rocks. You can't see the sea. You can barely see your own boots. The world outside your window has become a blank page, and you, lucky you, are the tiny punctuation mark holding your breath at the center. You light the lamp as usual, careful with the wick, slow with the crank, every movement second nature now. The beam cuts through the fog in measured sweeps, but the world swallows it whole. It's eerie, sending out light with no visible destination, like whispering into a pillow and hoping someone on the other side hears it. Downstairs, breakfast is the usual fanfare. Toast, tea, and a tin of something called meat product. You don't ask questions anymore. You chew. You swallow. You accept. The gulls are gone today. Even Commodore Regret, usually perched like a cursed sentry on the railing, is nowhere to be seen. You take that as a sign. The sky has declared a truce, or perhaps a warning. You fill the silence by reading, then rereading, then skimming your own journal entries out loud just to hear a voice in the room. Your voice. Strange how even that starts to feel like someone else's after a while. You flip to the logbook. There's a page from 2 months ago you don't remember writing. Fog rolled in again. Thick. Heavy. Dreamt of glass cracking under pressure. Dreamt of light turning in reverse. Woke with blood in my mouth. No injury found. You trace the sentence with your finger. You're not sure if it's yours. You're not sure if that makes it better or worse. Mainstream fact. During heavy fog, lighthouse keepers in the 1920s were sometimes required to sound a fog bell every few minutes, even manually. Some keepers reported the sound echoing back to them in strange, delayed patterns. One keeper famously called it a ghost playing catch. You open your journal to a fresh page and write, no sound from outside, no gulls, no surf. Fog absorbing everything. Feels like the world has been swallowed. You underline everything twice. You pace the tower, top to bottom, multiple times. Just to move. Just to feel like part of a system that still turns. The lens, at least, spins faithfully, unbothered by mood or myth. By afternoon, you start hearing things. First, it's a knock at the base of the tower. You freeze mid-step. Wait. It comes again. But when you rush down, flinging the heavy door open, nothing. Just fog. Dense and silent. You yell into it once, cautiously. Your voice disappears like a stone tossed into mist. Next comes the whisper. Not words. Not exactly. Just the suggestion of something vocal. You lean close to the lantern room glass, ears straining, heart thudding in your throat. But it stops before you can name it. You check the crack in the pane again. Wider. You write in the log. 4:22 p.m. Fog abnormal. No animal activity. Sound anomalies noted. Lantern stable. Glass crack expanding. Wind still absent. Recommend follow-up if records survive. You don't say if I survive. You think it, though. Dinner is skipped. Not from fear, from distraction. You sit in the stairwell for over an hour, wrapped in your coat, lamp in hand, listening. Just listening. The fog presses against the windows like cotton soaked in cold water. It has weight. It has presence. It breathes. At some point, you climb to the lantern room and stand beside the flame. You rest your hand on the railing and lean your forehead against the cool, cracked glass. You count the rotations. 12 seconds. 12 seconds. 12 seconds. Then, on the 6th pass, you see it. A shape. Not a boat. Not an animal. Not something you can name. Just a darker shadow in the white. Still. Watching. Close enough that you feel seen. You blink. It's gone. Quirky tidbit. In one 1927 log entry from a keeper in Nova Scotia, a similar event was described. Fog thick, saw shape in white, larger than a man. Still, I did not look again. It's one of many unexplained entries filed and forgotten. You stay awake all night, reading, writing, walking, checking the glass, watching the light. You don't see the shape again. You don't hear the whispers, but you feel them, like breath on the back of your neck. You write one last thing in your journal before dawn breaks, pale and exhausted. The fog came alive last night. Or maybe I did. Either way, something was different. The sea listened, and this time it spoke first. Then you set the book down, gently, and say out loud, quietly, calmly, to no one in particular, I am still here. And the fog begins to lift. The morning air carries a softness you haven't felt in days. No fog, no strange sounds, no bells from the beyond. Just crisp, cool wind and the slow exhale of a sea that seems to be catching its breath right along with you. You rise without urgency. Your joints creak a little, but your thoughts move slow and even, like ripples on a still tide. Your first act of the day isn't lighting the lamp. Not yet. It's walking barefoot across the stone floor of the kitchen to the stove and brewing the best cup of tea you've made all month. You sit at the table. You sip. You sigh. Everything is, for once, exactly quiet. You light the lamp a little later than usual. Not neglect, just reverence. Each motion is ceremonial. You trim the wick with the care of a surgeon. You polish the lens, even though it barely needs it. You crank the rotation by hand first, listening for any imperfection. There is none. The lantern glows. The light turns. Steady, faithful, patient, like it always has. Downstairs, you write in the log with your neatest handwriting yet. 8:47 a.m. Clear skies, light breeze, visibility strong, flame bright, no anomalies, quiet, peaceful, grateful. You underline grateful. After breakfast, you finally open the personal parcel you'd been saving for a special mood. Inside is a small envelope containing several black and white photographs. A few are of lighthouses. Some show faces, fellow keepers, you assume, men with stern eyes and heavy coats, women with tools in hand and grit in their smiles. But one photo makes your breath catch. It's a view from the top of your lighthouse. A picture taken, perhaps decades ago, from the exact spot where you now stand each morning. The horizon is the same. The rock formations below, the shoreline curve, unchanged. Even the railing in the photo has that same familiar scratch in the iron. You hold the picture up and compare it to the real thing outside the window. They match. Perfectly. Time collapses, briefly. You see yourself reflected in the glass, standing in the same position as some long-gone keeper, staring out at a world both identical and unrecognizably distant. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers were truly isolated or part of a long invisible chain of souls watching over the sea in turns. Guardians of repetition, stewards of sameness. You decide today that you are part of something old. You put the photo beside your journal and sit on the bench outside for lunch. Canned sardines, crackers, A lemon wedge you've been hoarding for weeks, like a dragon with citrus. The air smells clean, not salty, not damp, just clean. You watch the waves for a long time. One of the gulls returns, possibly Commodore Regret, but you're too relaxed to demand confirmation. It lands nearby and immediately starts stealing your crumbs. You let it. As the sun dips lower, you climb to the lantern room one last time that day. You check the glass. The crack is there, still, but it hasn't grown. You rest your hand against it. The sea is calm. The sky is open. The light begins its sweep. 12 seconds. 12 seconds. You start whispering stories to the beam about the soup disasters, about Captain Beekson and the Crab Embassy, about the night the fog came alive. You laugh softly at your own absurdity. You know no one can hear you, but you speak anyway. And when night fully arrives and the stars return without competition from the fog, you feel, oddly, like someone is listening. Maybe the sea, maybe the past, maybe the next keeper, long from now. You make one last journal entry before bed. This place remembers us. The rocks, the tower, the sea. We come and go, but something remains. I was here. I lit the flame. I kept watch. You sleep easily, without dreams. The night passes without incident. The light keeps turning. The world stays whole. The job, for today, is done.